Hey guys, my name is Toby, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to retouch eyes in portraiture. And I think this is probably one of the most important things to get right when you're doing a portrait. And the reason for that is that, people often say the eyes are the window to the soul and that kind of thing, but arguably I think that in a portrait the eyes are the absolute focal point that people look at when you look at a picture. And there's a bit of psychology behind that, because if you think about when you have a conversation with somebody or when you greet somebody, you look them in the eyes. You don't really realise that you do it, but that's kind of what happens. And the same is true of a photo. When you look at a photo of a person like this one for the first time, you look at the eyes. So they need to be spot on. You can't really afford to get that wrong. And unfortunately, when people first start retouching portraits, they're one of the areas that often get a little bit overworked. And I'm going to show you a bad example of what I see quite a lot of the time by people who are just getting into retouching portraits. And that is, you get something a bit like this. And for those of you who've seen Stargate, you might be reminded of some of the bad guys from that who have these big glowing eyes. Or, possibly it looks a little bit like she has a giant light bulb inside of her head that's beaming out through her eyes. Now, the big problem with this is that it has made her eyes kind of more colourful and clearer, but this technique treats the eyes as a whole, which is wrong, because if you think about it, they call it the whites of your eyes, but the whites of your eyes aren't white. They're almost this kind of bluey grey sort of colour. And trying to make them white doesn't add anything. It just looks unnatural, a little bit freaky, and a little bit... So we're not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this group because we don't want that. So, how do we go about doing this and making it look good? Well, rule one is you kind of want to leave almost the colour of the whites of the eyes completely alone. You don't really want to mess with that. But what we do want to do to the whites of the eyes is there are a few sort of... blood vessels that we've got in here, and even if you're someone who gets a lot of sleep, everybody kind of has these, but I think when you're doing a retouch it's okay to get rid of these. So let's put it this way, I've never had anybody complain at me for making their eyes less bloodshot. So we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, because what we're going to do is we're going to clone and heal these to get rid of them. And I always think it's good to do that on a new layer, just because it means that if we need to make changes later, we can. So to start with, I'm going to take the healing brush. Now, we could use the spot healing brush, but the problem is with the spot healing brush, as it kind of picks the area to sample from automatically, we actually only want it to sample from inside this little area here, and it's probably going to try and grab from bits of skin, and we're going to end up putting the wrong textures in. So we're going to do it almost manually using the normal healing brush. So I'm going to take the healing brush and I'm going to sample from inside of her eye. Just zoom in a bit closer here. And I'm just going to start to kind of paint these out. And what you're going to notice is that the whole time that I'm doing this, I'm kind of randomly resampling from somewhere else. It's an interesting fact that our brains are very good at picking out patterns. So if you start seeing the same group of pixels over and over and over again, it's going to really stick out that this photo has been retouched, and you don't want to do that. So it's just a case of doing as much random sampling as possible. And the reason why we're using the healing brush rather than the clone stamp is that we want to preserve this kind of shadow that we've got going across her eyeball. It's not the most obvious thing in the world, but this side of her eye is in more shadow than this side, and that is because her eye is round. Now, if we were to clone stamp this, you'd actually start to kind of lose that shape. If everything suddenly became the same flat colour, her eye wouldn't look round anymore, and that would just, again, it's one of these things where it would just look a bit wrong. So that's why we're using the healing tools for this bit. And I think that's starting to look pretty good compared to what it was. Let's just have a look at without and with. Okay, it's pretty good. I'm happy with that. Now, the other bit on this eye that is going to be a bit problematic is there's like a little flick here, and that could be a couple of things. That could be just the shape of her iris. Some people have slightly not perfectly round irises. But more than likely, I think that's actually a bit of her eyelash that's kind of just giving this a bit of an uneven edge. So what we're going to do is this one, we're going to clone stamp. And oh, by the way, I should have mentioned this before. When you're working on a new layer to do your cloning and healing, with the healing brush, you need to make sure that current and below is selected. As well as if you're using the clone stamp, you need to make sure that current and below is set for your sampling. Otherwise, it won't work. So just be aware of that. But anyway, as we were saying, we're going to get rid of this little blip here, and what we're going to do is because we're dealing with an edge here that we kind of don't want to mess up, we are going to use the clone stamp tool. The healing brush won't do as good of a job with an edge like this. So what we need to do is we actually need to go and turn on some extra tools for the clone stamp. Because this is a curved surface, if I were to just sample from down here and paste this, then you kind of end up with a really flat shape here, and we actually want to kind of continue this curve. So the way we do that is by using the clone source tools, which you can get to by going up to Window and Clone Source. And this is going to pop open this little tab here, which has a few really cool options in it, so you can do some funky things with the clone stamp tool. But the one that we're interested in is this one here, which lets us change the angle at which we copy paste. So this is like saying copy and paste these pixels but turn them 10 degrees, which is exactly what we want to do. So I'm going to sample from somewhere down here, and then as I paste this up, it's going to actually kind of rotate our brush so that it still continues that curve, which is going to look a lot better. And I'm just going to put this back to 0 now that we've done that. And yeah, again, that's quite a lot better than where it was, so I'm happy with that. And the next one, we'll just have a look at this eye quickly. Not as much to be done here, mostly because the sort of bloodshot area of her eye here has taken a lot more of the light, so it's a lot softer. But we're still going to come in here, just keep sampling with the healing brush, and just paint some of these out. Again, this is all kind of really subtle stuff. It might not make the biggest difference in the world, but sometimes it can be really helpful to come in here and do this. It does depend how much the image is going to be scrutinized, if you like. And there's just a bit of makeup there that I want to get rid of. So we'll just paint that out as well. Now we've also got this one eyelash which is kind of protruding into the eyeball, and I don't really like that, so we're going to just try and heal this out as well. We might have some issues as we get closer to the iris because the colours are going to start to want to blend together. So we might just come in here with the clone stamp tool, make it really, really super small, and just kind of paste that out. There we go. I think that is pretty reasonable. I'm fairly happy with that. Now, what you could do if you really were going to be fussy is any of these little like clumps on the makeup, we could just come in here and sort of paste or clone stamp some of these out as well. This isn't going to make a huge difference, and it's kind of up to you whether it's worth doing or not. But it's just a case of getting rid of any of these little blobs. It just makes the makeup look a little bit neater. I think, you know, that's probably all we actually really need to do for this. There's a couple other bits we could come here and do it, but I'll just get rid of this one. Just because we can. There we go. Okay, so we've tidied up the whites of the eyes. Now let's look at the actual iris itself, because this is kind of where all the impressive stuff happens. So we're going to do some color and brightness and contrast adjustments using adjustment layers. So we'll start off with color. I'm going to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to desaturate this entirely. And the reason I'm doing this is because before we can kind of adjust the iris, we need to kind of mask in where we are and aren't having an effect. So at the moment we're affecting everything and turning it black and white. I'm going to paint with a black brush, and I'm going to make it sort of somewhat in the middle for hardness. And we're just going to kind of paint this in. Again, I'm just kind of doing this so I can actually see where it is I am affecting this, and we're going to turn this adjustment back off in a second, because obviously we don't want to make the whole image black and white. It's just a good way of kind of visualizing where you're working, and I think that's pretty good. Okay, so now we can go back to our hue and saturation, and we can desaturate this. Now the problem is that we actually want this mask to be the other way around, because at the moment this is affecting everything except her eyes, and we want it to only affect her eyes. So I'm going to take this mask, select it, and press Command or Control if you're on the PC, and the letter I. So now that's flipped it. So now when we do our hue and saturation, it's going to only affect her eyes. Now obviously that's probably a little bit too colourful, but we can maybe bring this up to somewhere like that, I guess. That's pretty good. And I want to kind of just bring out the blues and greens in her eye a little bit more here. So I'm going to go down to the greens tab, and I'm just going to kind of push this over. So this is changing the range of colours that we have selected, so that this particular instance of a tool is going to only affects certain colours. So that's doing something interesting. I think that's okay. Yeah, we'll go with that. There's not a lot of colour in this section of the eye, so this is not making a huge adjustment, and we obviously don't want to oversaturate and get that effect. So somewhere around there is probably pretty good. It's just making that bit a little bit more colourful. Okay, now we do have a problem. One thing that you wouldn't get with this kind of shoot is the softbox reflection, so the catchlight in our eye wouldn't be blue, and this is because our hue and saturation adjustment is actually bringing out a lot of colour that's kind of not really there, if that makes sense. So what we're going to do is just in our mask, I'm going to take the brush tool, I'm going to make it a fairly hard brush, quite a lot smaller, even smaller than that. We want like maybe a 10 pixel brush, 6, 5, something like that. Yeah, okay, go with that. And I'm just going to paint black in here to stop this layer mask having an effect. And we're just going to kind of tidy this up a bit, make sure that it's not affecting any of that area there, and we'll do the same thing on the other eye. So we'll just come around here, quickly mask that out, and simple as that. And I'm just going to unmask a little bit of our iris there, because that's got a tiny bit of colour that we don't really want to enhance. Okay, so that's pretty good. So that's having quite a subtle effect. Now, the thing is, when we do the next step, this step is going to kind of have even more of an effect. It's kind of weird how this works, but you'll see what I mean. So what we want to do is we want to add a levels adjustment layer. And what we actually want to do is copy this layer mask into here. So they have exactly the same layer mask. So I'm going to hold down Alt or Option on the Mac and click the layer mask. That's going to bring it up full screen for me. So now I can press Command or Control A to select the whole canvas. I'm going to hit Command Copy, go over into our other layer mask and just paste it with Command or Control V. So we've now copy pasted our layer mask over, so they share exactly the same layer mask. And hold Alt to come out of that view, and here we go. So now we're ready to start messing around with our levels. So one of the ways that you kind of add more detail is you want to just kind of add a bit of contrast, really. So I'm just going to bring up the whites of our eyes quite a lot and just kind of do something a bit like that. So I think maybe our masking here is ever so slightly off, because that doesn't look quite right. So let's just come in here and just very carefully just kind of refine this a little bit, because there's something not right there. Okay, so again, this is one of these things that you want to make sure you don't really overdo it, but it's just kind of finding a point where this change kind of looks quite good. So something like that. Maybe you could bring the output down a little bit. And this is just going to mean that we can have more contrast, but it's not going to make our eyes like unnaturally bright. So we can change the way the tones in there are kind of sitting without actually, you know, blowing things out that shouldn't be blown out, if you see what I mean. So if we turn those off, you can see that that has made our eyes quite a lot brighter. And if we just group these together, we can turn these off and on. And that has really kind of just put a little bit of colour and a little bit of sparkle back into our eyes that was always there, but just hasn't really come through in this photo. So again, that's before. You kind of got the sort of dark grey, fairly dull eyes compared to slightly brighter and slightly more colourful. So I think that is going to do it. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Toby, and we'll see you soon.